I think that Alberta has expressed some concerns about the ban. I would simply say that the ban is a very small part of the plastics industry in Canada and the utilization of plastic in Canada. And it is really focused on those specific items that are very hard to recycle. So it's hard to see how it would have any significant bearing on the development of a recycling industry.
Welcome back to Power and Politics. As we told you a bit earlier in the show, the federal government has announced that it's banning 6 single-use plastics, including straws, stir sticks, and plastic cutlery. The ban will go into effect at the end of 2021. The move could drive another wedge, though, between Ottawa and Alberta, and here's why.
We are aiming for having the top system in the western half of the North American continent for plastics recycling and reuse to help meet goals of reducing plastic waste to zero.
Alberta, as you heard there, wants recycling to play a key role in its diversification strategy. So what does the province think about this federal plastics ban? I'm joined now by Alberta Energy Minister Sonia Savage in Calgary. Hi, Minister. Good to see you again.
Well, hi, Vassie. Good to be back on your show again.
I know earlier today that you did express some concern about the federal government's announcement and what it could mean for the plans that your province has to pursue a bigger recycling industry. But Minister Wilkinson, we just had him on the show, and you heard that clip from him. He points out that the plastics being banned are actually ones that are very hard to recycle. So your initiative should be fine, no?
Well, I think that the bigger issue here and the irony about today's announcement is that we heard about it and the questions came up at our announcement in Alberta where we're talking about creating jobs and growing an economy and diversifying in the geothermal sector. And yesterday we made an announcement about recovering and growing our economy and diversifying in the petrochemical sector. So I think that's the bigger issue is what does an announcement like today coming out of Ottawa saying they're going to ban plastics, what kind of signal does that send to investors who are looking at investing in Alberta, in Canada, in petrochemicals when Ottawa is putting in a ban right the day after Alberta says we want to diversify our economy and attract a petrochemical sector. I just think the irony is very, very strong there. We're doing everything we can in Alberta to recover from this economic downturn after COVID, to grow our economy, to attract investment, to create jobs. And we put forward announcement after announcement to do that. And Ottawa seems to be going in a different direction.
I mean, to be fair, this is something that the government has signaled for a while. They put it in the throne speech. This isn't necessarily something new that they're proposing. Are you accusing the federal government of sort of purposefully announcing it today to rain on what you were doing?
No, I just think it's ironic as we're doing everything we possibly can in Alberta to signal to investors that we are creating an environment and a climate and a regulatory framework and a competitive jurisdiction to bring investment in and to diversify our economies, that we're getting mixed signals from Ottawa.
Respectfully, though, there are other jurisdictions throughout the country that have already moved to ban those sorts of plastics. There are many other countries. We're actually kind of a laggard in that. Is Alberta putting its eggs in the wrong basket by relying on the plastics industry rather to help diversify itself?
Well, we're looking at diversifying in all aspects. Today's announcement was about geothermal, about bringing in and attracting investment to grow a geothermal economy. Yesterday was about natural gas, including hydrogen and petrochemicals, LNG. The previous week, we talked about bringing in a mines and mineral sector to attract investment in that area. And prior to that, we talked about small modular reactors for nuclear. So we're doing a lot and looking at all sorts of sectors to diversify our economy and to build on what we do best here in Alberta, and that's oil and gas.
Yeah, I have a question about the larger plan for sure. But I mean, what you're saying is essentially that the federal government, by doing this, is sending a bad message to potential investors. And I'm asking whether that's in fact true, that while so much of the country and other countries have already gone ahead with this ban, whether perhaps it's your strategy that's at fault, not what the feds are doing.
Well, I think we're trying to grow a petrochemical sector. And like many other things in the world, we've got a continuing demand for oil and gas. We've got a continuing demand for plastics, and it's going to be produced somewhere. We're talking here, and the point I'm making at is we're trying to bring in a petrochemical sector. It's a $30 billion industry here in Alberta. I know BC and Quebec and Ontario are trying to to attract a petrochemical sector. And at a time when we're trying to recover our economies, to diversify, to grow, to attract investment, please, Canada, do no harm to us. Let us get out there and send the signals to investors that we're open for business, that we're a jurisdiction that investors want to invest in.
Okay, I want to ask you more broadly about that investment, about the potential for investment and the diversification of your economy. You mentioned geothermal. You made an announcement around hydrogen. Are these announcements in an effort to admit, really, or can we perceive them as an admission that your government has relied too heavily on the oil and gas sector?
No. I think what we know and what's a fact and reality out there is that the world will continue to use oil and gas. In fact, every credible forecast out there shows that the demand for that oil and gas will continue to dominate the energy mix for decades to come, and will continue to be a part of that. But all of those forecasts also say that there will be new and growing investments in all these other areas like geothermal, hydrogen, small modular reactors. And for Alberta, that's a great opportunity to bring that investment here. So it's not an either or conversation, it's an and conversation. We can continue to support and grow our investments in oil and gas, but we also want to bring the new business and the new investments here to Alberta.
Are those investments, though, really what you say they are? And I'm asking for a couple of reasons. First of all, take, for example, the revenue hit that your government has taken. About a third or a full third of all of the revenue decrease that you saw since the budget is due to a decrease in non-renewable resource revenue. Then you've got things like what's going on with Suncor. They're laying off 15% of their staff over the next year and a half. The unprecedented drop in oil prices, unfortunately, their statement reads, the continued impact of the pandemic and economic slowdown, as well as continued market volatility, have accelerated their plans. Is the industry really where you should be putting so many eggs?
Well, the impact of COVID-19 and the destruction in demand for use of oil in particular, as the world locked itself in and stopped going to people stayed home, people weren't flying, resulted in at the time in May, about a 30% drop in demand and a price collapse for oil. We're seeing now a recovery in that demand. We're seeing a recovery in price, albeit it's a little bit slow. It's trending for WTI around $40 a barrel. So we're going to see that recover at some point, and with that, our revenues from oil and gas continue to grow. But why wouldn't we try to also attract investment in these new and growing areas? It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for the economy. It's the right thing for jobs. It's the right thing to diversify. That investment is going somewhere, and we have so many advantages in Alberta. We want it here in Alberta.
Certainly, I'm not trying to take away from the pursuit of diversification, but if in fact this industry is going to rebound to the degree that you say it is, why would Suncor decide to do what it did?
Well, right now it's oil prices at $40 a barrel are challenging to these industries. It has been challenged through the spring, but we know, and it's a fact. Every credible analyst has said that the demand will increase, that it will rebound, and that the world will get back to normal a bit. Will we? The
private sector just doesn't seem as sure. Is all.
Well. Yeah, you know what, and I'll point out another issue. Just this week, just today, we hear out of Saudi Arabia as companies like BP are starting to rethink where their investments are going and rethink the percentage of investments they're putting in oil and gas. Saudi Arabia sees that as an opportunity to increase their production and to scoop up that growing demand. So the one thing for sure, if that production doesn't come from jurisdictions like Alberta, it's coming from somewhere else. Our loss would be an opportunity for nations like Saudi Arabia and Russia to pick up market share. And we don't want to see that. We want to see that investment here in Alberta. We want to see that barrel of oil produced in Alberta because we do it best. We do it with the highest environmental standards. And why would we give that barrel to Saudi Arabia and Russia?
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
The federal government is moving ahead with a goal to reach zero plastic waste by 2030. Today, it announced these 6 single-use plastics, take a look at the screen there, will be banned across the country by the end of next year. The feds say they're starting with these items because they're the hardest to recycle and are the most harmful to the environment. Let's bring in Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, to find out more about how all of this will work. Hi, Minister. Good to see you as always.
Nice to see you.
Before I ask you kind of about the nitty-gritty of the plan, I kind of wanted to get a sense from you about the timing of it. And I'm asking because I know there was a report, for example, from Dalhousie University conducted during the pandemic this summer. It showed that Canadian support for a plastics ban has decreased during the pandemic. It's not an anti-environment thing at all. It's just that a majority of them said that the ban should be put off until after it ends. A lot of people feel safer with stuff that they can throw out right now. I know you're promising these regulations by the end of 2021, but how does that kind of weigh into your calculations? Is it possible that that changes if, in fact, we're still being told to use only plastic at grocery stores?
No, I don't think it changes. I mean, first of all, I think people need to understand this is a comprehensive approach to addressing plastic. It is focused on enhancing recycling and recycled content, making producers more responsible for the collecting and recycling of products. And the vast majority of products, plastic products, are not banned, are not going to be banned. They are products that can be relatively easily recycled, and we need to do a better job than we're doing right now, where we're only recycling 9% of our plastics. The ban is focused on 6 particular items that are harmful in the environment, and for which there are reasonable alternatives that can be used. And so those are items like straws and plastic bags, where many municipalities have already moved in that direction. So the focus for us is ensuring that these can be implemented in a way that are both cost effective, but also are ensuring that Canadians have access to the kinds of things that they need at a time where obviously we are using more single-use items.
Yeah, I guess what sort of brought it to mind for me was in BC. I remember covering in January when they were saying we have too much of a piecemeal approach here where plastic bags are concerned. It's at the municipal level. We want to bring in something provincial. And then a few months later, I remember watching Dr. Bonnie Henry say, you should be using plastic bags at the grocery store. Don't even use reusable ones. It's just sort of changed the dynamic. It has nothing to do with the policy of it. I know that it's understandable. It's sound. It's just might be difficult for people.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there are different jurisdictions certainly during the pandemic that have taken different decisions on reusable bags, but that's not the only option. I mean, the grocery store in the community I live in North Vancouver uses paper bags, and they have since they opened a year ago. And they've done that for the specific reason that they didn't want to use plastic because of the environmental considerations. So when we've gone through this, we've looked at what are the available options, and are they things that can be used now, and are they reasonable from a cost perspective? And the answer for these 6 items is yes. The reason that the list is not longer is most of the other items can be recycled. We just need to do a better job of how we do that.
I have a question for you on recycling, but first from the cost perspective. We know that during this pandemic as well, businesses, and in particular small businesses, have been really hard hit. At the end of 2021, they'll likely, even if best case scenario there's a vaccine, they'll likely still be paying off the debts that they accrued during this pandemic. Is there any plan or any sort of anything in sight to help address the additional costs that they might have to bear because of this?
Well, we certainly looked at that very closely, and I will tell you that for most of these items, the cost differences are not significant. There's not much difference between a paper bag and a plastic bag. And certainly many places have already moved away, for example, from plastic straws to paper straws, where there's not a significant price difference. Certainly many restaurants that are doing takeout, again, have moved away from expanded polystyrene, which is styrofoam, which is the issue that's on the list, in favor of compostable products and a range of other things. And I would say to you that as we get closer to these products being banned, one of the things that you're going to see is significant investment in products that actually will replace them, which will have economies of scale and will drive out any price difference that exists. So, our view is, and we certainly are very sensitive to the concerns of small business, especially at this point in time, is that this is not going to be a significant cost adder, but it is going to be something that enables Canadians to take action on what is a real problem. And it's not just a real problem in terms of the amount of plastic that is going into our lakes and rivers and oceans, although that is a huge problem. It's also the microplastics that are in the water that each and every one of us are drinking each and every day.
What if, Minister, you end up being wrong in some capacity? What if it ends up costing a little bit more? I mean, you're still going to embark on a 2-month consultation. Is there, are you open to addressing that if that ends up being the case?
Look, we're going through a consultation process to ensure that we hear from people, and certainly we will reflect on whatever it is that we hear. But I will say that, as a starting point, we certainly did look at the issue of cost impacts as we went through this process. We looked at it very closely. And I will tell you that every time we've looked at how do we actually address environmental challenges and put into place different products, people start often by saying this is going to be more expensive, and as we get closer to it, the substitutes start to be manufactured in larger numbers, and you end up with the difference being very small or not at all. I mean, look at chlorofluorocarbons that we got rid of from refrigerants. Exactly, that happened exactly. So.
On the other end of things, and this is in the vein of recycling that I wanted to ask you about, Greenpeace says that what your government is proposing here, and the whole suite of proposals, doesn't go nearly far enough. And they specifically highlighted a lack of funds or plan to create more plastic recycling. You said in remarks earlier today that these changes will prompt the creation of a market. But right now there are fewer than a dozen companies in the country that currently do this kind of recycling. How do you know that market will be created for sure?
Well, I know that market will be created for sure because the provinces are moving, and we have been part of this conversation towards what's called extended producer responsibility, which means the producers and sellers of plastic products are going to be responsible for the collection and the recycling. And one of the reasons why we need national standards with respect to recycled content and respect to recycling rates is to ensure that there's a significant enough market, a big enough market for people to make those investments. And that will be investments made by producers of plastic and sellers of them. And this is exactly what most of industry has been asking us for. And that includes people like Canadian Tire and Walmart and A&W and Tim Hortons and all of those. So I am very confident that we are going to see the kinds of investments in recycling infrastructure that we need to see, in part because it is going to become the responsibility of the producers.
How fast can that happen, though? And I just want to make Canadians aware, a very little amount of the plastic that is supposedly, quote unquote, recycled is actually recycled. I think StatsCan says it's just 9%, and there are 3 million tons of plastic waste annually. So how fast can that market actually be created?
Well, I think it can be created, and I think that ideally we're going to hear more from industry as they speak about their plans going forward. But certainly part of the consultation is to say what are the targets that we should be establishing with respect to recycling rates and over what period of time, how quickly can you get there. That is part of the conversation we need to have with Canadians, that we need to have with industry, and obviously provinces and territories are deeply invested in this conversation. But I do think that we can make significant strides over the next few years, and clearly we need to move towards the commitment that provinces, territories, and the federal government made a couple of years ago, which is a net plastic, elimination of plastic by 2030.
And so how does it work with provinces? Will you dictate what the targets are going to be? Will they be enforceable, or will there be a back and forth? Because we've heard some, for example, already concern out of Alberta around what might come down from Ottawa without discussion.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've been talking about this at the Canadian Council of Environment Ministers for 2 years now. In fact, we had spent quite a lot of time at it, discussing it in the summer when we actually met most recently. And we will continue to dialogue with the provinces and territories to ensure that we actually are doing this in a collaborative way. Ultimately, what this needs to be effective, though, are standards that actually exist across the country so that we don't have 10 little markets trying to do different things. We need to have consistency across the country. This is, industry's been very clear about that, and there are very good economic reasons as to why that is the case. But certainly, we want to work collaboratively, and I think that by and large, the Canadian Council of Environment Ministers have been united on this issue in terms of where we need to go, and by and large, how we need to get there.
On this issue, maybe. On other issues around the environment, not so. I mean, they've taken the federal government to court. There is sort of a jurisdictional issue with some of the provinces between them and the federal government. How sure are you? I mean, are you basically saying that, there has to be a national standard and it will be imposed?
No, we will be working together to come up with what that standard should look like, and that is something that we have been doing over the past little while. But there is an opportunity to put into place standards that will exist across the country under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. That is the law in Canada that is about environmental protection, but certainly, my commitment to my colleagues is we're going to work collaboratively to figure out what the best way forward is, but certainly there do need to be national standards or this is not going to work.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is that I remember the targets, for example, that were set under the former environment minister, and there was a lot of collaboration initially, and ultimately your government decided that because there wasn't widespread agreement, you were just going to do what you felt was necessary. And I guess, I'm about to interview the Minister of Energy, who is concerned about something like that happening in this instance, and I'm wondering if that's what you are prepared to do.
Well, look, I never start from that perspective. I mean, I spent a number of years as a federal-provincial relations specialist for the province of Saskatchewan, and so I've worked in Fed-Prov relations. It never works very well if you start the conversation by saying you're going to dictate the terms. My commitment to my colleagues is to work in a collaborative way to try to get to outcomes that we've already said we all agree with. I think the comments coming out of Alberta today were interesting. I mean, they made an announcement yesterday with respect to becoming a center of excellence with respect to recycling, and I applaud that. I think that's fantastic. And from an economic opportunities perspective, that's exactly what we've been saying should and would happen. I think the concerns that I've heard from Alberta have to do with the list of banned products, and there isn't unanimity on that. I certainly think that's true. But by and large, I think directionally there is agreement. And with respect to the list of banned products, these are harmful in the environment. They are the things that are extremely hard to recycle or are very costly to recycle. And at the end of the day, Canadians know that this is something that we need to act on. I mean, Canadians have been ahead of their governments on this issue for a long time, and Canada is far behind many other countries in the world in terms of addressing this issue. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time, Minister. Appreciate it as always. Thank you. Jonathan Wilkinson is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.